Right now, emotional testimony at the Benghazi hearings today. But the question is it the smoking gun that critics were hoping for? We're going to fill you in what happened and what you missed. And next, we'll be joined on set by former Congresswoman Nan Hayworth. She'll tell us about where background checks goes from here in Washington, her guests, and also a whole host of issues sitting there in Capitol Hill. And later, Governor Christie, man loses his fleece, and he puts out a pretty funny video. We'll tell you why. This is Smart Politics. Good evening, everybody, and welcome to RFL. I'm Richard French. Thanks so much for joining us on what's turned out to be a very busy Wednesday, May 8th. Let's start, though, tonight with those Benghazi hearings.
At about 3 a.m., I received a call from the Prime Minister of Libya. I think it's the saddest phone call I've ever had in my life. He told me that Ambassador Stevens had passed away.
What happened prior, during, and after the attack matter. It matters to me personally, and it matters to my colleagues, to my colleagues at the Department of State. It matters to the American public for whom we serve.
Emotional testimony, as we said today on the Hill, about last year's deadly attack on the U.S. consulate in Benghazi, Libya. 3 witnesses provided their description of how events unfolded the night a U.S. ambassador and 3 other Americans were killed. Republicans accused the president and the administration of covering up the incident, and they called today's hearing to try and get to the bottom of some of those elusive answers. Now, 3 State Department witnesses, they've come forward with information challenging the Obama administration's handling of the Benghazi attack. Gregory Hicks, who you just heard from, the former deputy chief of the mission in Libya, believes the administration could have done more that night. He says he repeatedly inquired about whether military support was on the way. Hicks claims the Special Forces unit in Tripoli was prepared to board a flight to Benghazi, but were told not to because they didn't have the authorization.
How did the personnel react to being told to stand down?
They were furious. I can only say, well, I will quote Lieutenant Colonel Gibson. He said, "This is the first time in my career that a diplomat has more balls than somebody in the military."
Where'd that message come down? Where'd the stand down order come from?
I believe it came from either AFRICOM or SOC Africa.
Now, in the days after the attack, UN Ambassador Susan Rice, she recited talking points from intelligence officials that the attack was a result of a spontaneous protest. Hicks says Rice never asked him about that evening and that he knew from the very onstart that, in fact, it was a terror attack.
No, the only report that our mission made through every channel was that there had been an attack on a consulate.
Not a protest.
No protest.
Now, the administration later admitted the incident was, in fact, a terrorist attack. Democrats, they've accused Republicans of politicizing Benghazi.
I am not questioning the motives of our witnesses. I am questioning the motives of those who want to use their statements for political purposes.
All right. I want to bring in our panel on this. We've got Scott Levinson, president of the Advance Group. Dominic Carter, of course, political journalist, author. Nan Hayworth, former Republican New York Congresswoman. Michael Tobman, principal at Hudson TG and a former advisor to Senator Charles Schumer. And senior political correspondent Andrew Whitman. I'll start with you. What was the takeaway from today?
The takeaway was you don't know who told them to stand down. And that's the big question mark coming out of today's hearings. Everybody wants to know who gave that order to stand down. It's a critical issue. You know, we acknowledge that troops were needed.
Yep.
A critical moment, critical time, somebody gave that order. We don't know who that is.
But we do know from the Defense Secretary, Congresswoman, that Leon Panetta had said under testimony that they couldn't have gotten from Tripoli to Benghazi in the allotted time that, even in hindsight, people said they would have had to be there to stop this. The idea that there was, out of a tragedy here, some magical or elixir that could have fixed the problem on the ground and saved those 4 lives. People have on record saying that couldn't have happened. I know this by definition is Monday morning quarterbacking, and I don't think that's a bad thing. I think we should get to some answers, but aren't some people grasping for some things that have already been asked and answered?
No, well, there are several questions here, and I think, Scott, you've certainly encapsulated one of the key ones, which is where did the stand-down order come from? I was at 2 hearings, one before the election and one after regarding Benghazi, and they were classified briefings for members of Congress. And I'm not allowed to speak directly about them, obviously, but I will tell you that at the time, I felt that not enough questions were being asked about what had happened there, and that the public was not fully informed. Well, one of the, obviously, the first thought that comes to mind about military forces, we're the United States of America. Are you telling me that a place that is within the civilized world and not far from the Mediterranean Sea, somehow we have forces arrayed across that part of the world, that we could not somehow manage to get military supplies and help there? That just doesn't ring true. So I'm skeptical. I will tell you, I'm inherently skeptical about that. But beyond that, the other troubling aspect, of course, is that the administration's official, if you will, explanation of what caused that dreadful event that left our ambassador there and 3 other brave Americans dead was clearly false and actually hindered our further investigation, because the president of Libya preceded Susan Rice in the media saying this was clearly a terrorist attack and it had been well organized. It was not the result of the demonstration, but Susan Rice said something very different and made him look foolish, and that impeded our investigation.
Fair enough, but I still, if the worst mistake out of this is that Rice went on national TV and said that this was a demonstration that went bad, and we all know, and arguably should have known even before that Sunday appearance, that this was in fact a terror attack, that's a mistake. But the consequences, if that's the smoking gun out of this, is that what this is all about?
I'm a huge believer in congressional oversight of executive actions, but foreign policy and international affairs falls so squarely, almost exclusively in the realm of the president and the State Department and the executive branch, that even if the worst is learned in terms of the substance, in terms of process, at the time these were the decisions, it's the prerogative of the administration, of the president, to execute foreign policy in a dangerous posting. This didn't happen in France. It didn't happen in London. It happened in a part of the world that is dangerous. It is a tinderbox when the United States is, in parts of the world, still at war with Muslims and with the Arab world.
But we agree that if somebody told the military to stand down and don't send troops to...
These are discretionary actions. These are decisions that are made by the administration, and I don't know that they can be revisited in that way, what I would have done differently. There are important things to learn about this, and they're important going forward in terms of best practices and what goes on in the world in our postings, but what happened there, the Republicans in Congress, and I absolutely defer to the Congresswoman and your briefings, I wouldn't presume, but it hasn't stuck and it's not resonating with the public. They should move on to something else. They should continue this and learn what we should learn and move on, is my opinion.
I would submit, Mike, again, that I think not enough questions have been asked, and it does suspiciously look like part of a theme or a narrative when the president announced last summer at the convention, we have defeated Al-Qaeda. You know, clearly that would be called into question if there were a distinct terror attack related, and the thought certainly has entered the discussion that it was related to Al-Qaeda in some way. That would belie the narrative that the president was trying to pursue before the election.
Yeah, but now you're placing motives on why the mistake was done in the first place, which is almost 3 steps beyond where we're going.
That's not,
so
that's
you want
not
to ask
the primary
questions,
purpose, but
fair,
you do have to ask those questions.
But cover-up is a strong word, and I've heard that a lot in the last week. When I hear cover-up, I think Watergate. When I hear cover-up here, I think that you got a lot of branches here that are all in cahoots to try and pull one over on the American public. Andrew, is there something that came out of today that lends us to say, hey, this was done here to try and get over a hump in a bad stretch in an election here, and that people, you know, with political motives here try to make things go away?
You know, What we got today was a lot of layering and texturing to the stories that we've heard on Benghazi so far. First-person narratives, maybe the first insight that a lot of people have had to what may or may not have happened on the ground. But the questions that you're asking, and that I think the Congresswoman has been asking, are about the administration. What did the State Department know? What did the administration do? Were they involved in dropping the ball? That was never going to be really in the purview of the people who were testifying before Congress today. And so if the goal of today was to try to get answers to those questions, we didn't. We did, however, get more information to keep sort of the momentum going for further questions about Benghazi for those who are so inclined to ask.
I would remind everyone also that early rumblings about what happened in Benghazi happened in the context of Susan Rice's possible nomination for Secretary of State, which some senators were interested in somebody else getting that position. So if that didn't happen, would this have gone in a certain way in the Congress? Maybe, maybe not.
But again, Richard, we have to keep in mind, I sort of agreeing to a little bit what the Congresswoman is saying, the context of we were in the middle of a presidential election where the president, you know, was seen by some as in a little bit of trouble, even though he's strong foreign policy credentials. So I think today we saw some legitimate questions being raised, and that's a good thing. But at the same time, I don't think there was no smoking gun to point to a conspiracy. I think the question should continue to be raised, though.
Well, I was just going to point out one of the reasons why so many people are so skeptical of these questions and these hearings. There have been a series of them since the attack, but you can go back to an attack on the U.S. consulate in Pakistan in 2002, where was the similar level of investigation, 10 Americans dead. 2 Americans dead in 2004 in Uzbekistan, an attack on the consulate there. In Yemen in 2008, a bombing there. Not the same level of interest or investigation. And I think that's leading plenty of people to say there's a double standard.
Ambassador. I mean, it changes drastically.
But there are still attacks. There are still dead Americans and still
embassy
attacks.
Yeah, but it's a lot different when it involves an ambassador.
And it was on the anniversary of September 11th. I mean, you know, there's just a lot of ways in which you have to look at this very seriously as a significant event, one that was minimized.
I'll defer to you on this one. We talking about this 3 months from now or no?
Probably not. Bring me back in 3 months, we'll talk about
Very
it.
nice. Okay, when we come back, the capital of corruption, this much we can't agree on. Albany, what a mess. More today comes out here, and it's getting more and more crooked. Earlier this week, we reported that State Senator John Sampson, the 32nd state lawmaker to be accused of misbehaving in just the last 7 years. Well, we maybe can add some more names to that list here. We're going to be talking about that straight ahead.